The rain pounded against the pavement like 1,000 angry fists, each drop exploding into tiny nebulae of water that soaked through the thin fabric of my worn-out sneakers. I pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders, though it did little to keep the October chill from seeping into my bones. The bus stop offered minimal shelter, its plastic awning punctured with holes that leaked steadily onto my already damp hair. Tuesday evenings were always the worst. After 14 hours of scrubbing other people's toilets, dusting their expensive trinkets, and polishing silver I would never own, my body felt like it had been wrung out and hung to dry. The Morrison family had been particularly demanding today. A dinner party for 12 meant extra everything. Extra floors to mop, extra bathrooms to clean, extra judgment from women whose diamond earrings probably cost more than I made in 3 months. I checked my watch. 9:47 p.m. The last bus would arrive in 13 minutes, assuming it wasn't running late again. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the empty street in a brief flash of electric blue. In that moment of clarity, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small figure huddled against the brick wall of the alleyway across the street. At first, I thought it might be a pile of discarded clothes, or maybe a stray dog seeking shelter. But then a car drove past, its headlights sweeping across the alley entrance, and I caught a glimpse of a little boy's face, streaked with tears and rain. "Hey!" I called out, but my voice was swallowed by a roll of thunder. I hesitated for only a moment. My apartment was a 40-minute bus ride away, and I had to be up at 4 a.m. for my morning shift at the Donovan estate. But I couldn't just leave a child alone in this weather, in this neighborhood. Westwood Hills might look pristine and safe with its manicured lawns and security patrols, but I'd heard enough stories from the other maids to know better. I darted across the empty street, my feet splashing through puddles until I reached the entrance to the alley. The boy flinched when he saw me approaching, pressing himself tighter against the wall. "Hi there," I said, keeping my voice gentle as I crouched down to his eye level. "Are you okay? Are you lost?" He couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Dark hair plastered against his forehead, expensive-looking clothes soaked through, and eyes, striking amber eyes, wide with fear and something else. Recognition? No, that couldn't be right. I'd never seen this child before. "I can't find my daddy," he finally whispered, his voice barely audible above the storm. We were at the restaurant and I went to look at the fish tank, and when I came back, everyone was gone. My heart clenched. What kind of father leaves his 8-year-old son behind at a restaurant? I glanced up and down the deserted street. The rain was coming down harder now, and the temperature was dropping. "Which restaurant were you at, sweetheart? Maybe we can go back there and see if your dad is looking for you." "La Terrazza," he said, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "The one with the big fountain." I knew the place. An exclusive Italian restaurant about 6 blocks from here, the kind where the menu doesn't list prices because if you have to ask, you can't afford it. The kind of place where people like me enter through the back door, if at all. "Okay," I said, making a quick decision. "My name is Emma. What's yours?" "Luca," he said, still watching me warily. "Nice to meet you, Luca. Listen, I'm going to help you find your dad, all right? But first, let's get you out of this rain." I shrugged off my jacket and wrapped it around his shoulders. It was too big for him, but at least it was something. I checked my watch again. 9:52 p.m. I'd already missed my bus. "Come on," I said, offering my hand. "Let's get you somewhere warm and dry and we'll call your dad." Luca stared at my outstretched hand for a long moment, then slowly placed his smaller one in mine. His fingers were ice cold, but his grip was surprisingly strong. We walked 3 blocks in the rain until we reached a 24-hour diner. The fluorescent lights inside made me squint after the darkness of the storm, and the few late-night patrons turned to stare as we entered. A bedraggled woman and a soaking wet child who clearly didn't belong together. "2 hot chocolates, please," I told the waitress, who raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. I guided Luca to a booth in the corner, away from curious eyes, and helped him out of his wet coat. Underneath, he wore what looked like a custom-tailored suit jacket over a white shirt and dark pants. Even drenched, the quality was obvious. Definitely not department store clothes. "Do you have a phone number for your dad?" I asked as the waitress set down 2 steaming mugs. Luca nodded, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a sleek smartphone that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The screen was dark. "It's dead," he said, his bottom lip trembling slightly. "That's okay," I assured him. "We can use the diner phone. Do you know his number?" Luca recited a string of digits that I carefully wrote down on a napkin. I was about to stand up and ask the waitress to use their phone when the bell above the diner door chimed. A gust of cold air swept in, carrying with it the scent of expensive cologne and danger. The atmosphere in the diner shifted instantly. Conversations died mid-sentence. The cook peered out from the kitchen, then quickly disappeared again. The waitress froze, coffee pot suspended in midair. I didn't turn around immediately. Something primitive in my brain told me not to make any sudden movements, like I was sharing space with a predator. When I finally did look, my breath caught in my throat. A man stood in the doorway, water dripping from his black overcoat onto the linoleum floor. He was tall, imposingly so, with broad shoulders and the kind of presence that seemed to compress the air around him. His face was all sharp angles and shadows, a day's worth of stubble darkening his jaw. But it was his eyes that made my skin prickle with goosebumps, the exact same unusual amber color as Luca's, now narrowed as they scanned the diner. Behind him stood two more men, both in dark suits despite the hour, both with the unmistakable bulge of weapons beneath their jackets. They flanked the doorway like sentinels, their expressions impassive as they surveyed the room. "Daddy!" Luca's excited cry shattered the silence. He scrambled out of the booth and ran toward the man. The transformation on the man's face was immediate and startling. The hardness melted away, replaced by naked relief as he dropped to one knee and caught Luca in an embrace that lifted the boy off the ground. "Luca," he murmured, his voice a deep rumble that somehow carried across the diner. "Where have you been? I've been looking everywhere for you. I got lost," Luca said into his father's shoulder, "but Miss Emma found me and bought me hot chocolate." And just like that, the full weight of that amber gaze shifted to me. I felt pinned to my seat, unable to move as the man stood, keeping one hand firmly on his son's shoulder as he studied me. There was something calculating in his expression, something that made me feel like I was being dismantled and reassembled in his mind. "Miss Emma," he repeated, my name in his mouth sounding like something foreign and precious. A small, dangerous smile curved his lips. "I believe I owe you a debt of gratitude." I swallowed hard, finding my voice. Anyone would have done the same. His smile widened fractionally, revealing white teeth. "No, Miss Emma, they wouldn't have." He gestured to one of the men behind him, who immediately approached our booth. I tensed, but the man merely placed a thick envelope on the table. "For your kindness," Luca's father said. I didn't touch the envelope. "I don't want your money. I just wanted to help Luca." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or curiosity. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded once, as if coming to a decision. "Marco," he said, not taking his eyes off me. The second man stepped forward. "Call Antonio and tell him to bring the car around. And find out everything there is to know about Miss Sinclair," I supplied, regretting it immediately. Emma Sinclair. Everything about Miss Sinclair. A chill that had nothing to do with my wet clothes crept up my spine. Who was this man that he could walk into a room and command it so completely? Why did he need to find out everything about me? And why did I suddenly feel like I'd stepped into something much bigger and more dangerous than a simple act of kindness? "I really should be going," I said, sliding toward the edge of the booth. "I've missed my bus, but I can call a taxi." "Nonsense." He cut me off smoothly. "It's the least I can do to give you a ride home. I insist." The way he said insist made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Luca looked up at me, his earlier wariness replaced by a hopeful smile. "Please, Miss Emma. Daddy's car is really cool. It has TV screens and a mini fridge." I looked from Luca's innocent face to his father's inscrutable one and knew I was trapped. The smart thing would be to politely decline, to keep my distance from this man who radiated power and control. But something told me that walking away wasn't an option anymore. "Thank you," I said finally. "That's very generous." The man extended his hand to me, and after a brief hesitation, I took it. His skin was warm despite the rain, his grip firm but not crushing. "Salvatore Russo," he introduced himself, "and I am the one who should be thanking you, Miss Sinclair. You have no idea how precious my son is to me." The way he said precious sent another shiver through me. There was possession in his voice, an undertone of steel that suggested he would do anything, to protect what was his. And as he guided me out of the diner with one hand lightly at the small of my back, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just become entangled in something I might never escape. The car waiting outside the diner wasn't just a car. It was a fortress on wheels, sleek, black, and longer than any vehicle had a right to be. It hummed with quiet power against the curb. The rain seemed to avoid touching it, beating and rolling off the glossy surface, as if even water knew better than to leave marks on Salvatore Russo's possessions. A man in a dark suit held an umbrella over us as we approached. He didn't meet my eyes, but I felt his assessment as I passed, like being scanned by a human security system. The driver opened the rear door, revealing an interior that looked more like a luxury living room than transportation. Creamy leather seats, dark wood paneling, and, as Luca had promised, multiple screens, and what appeared to be a fully stocked minibar. "After you, Miss Sinclair," Salvatore said, his hand still hovering at the small of my back. Not quite touching me, but close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his palm. I climbed in, awkwardly aware of my damp clothes and the way they would stain the pristine leather. Luca scrambled in after me, seemingly unconcerned about his own wet attire as he bounced onto the seat across from mine. Salvatore followed last, his large frame making the spacious interior suddenly feel claustrophobic. "Where do you live, Miss Sinclair?" he asked as the car pulled smoothly away from the curb. I hesitated. Giving my address to a stranger, especially one like Salvatore Russo, went against every instinct of self-preservation I had. But refusing would be pointless. He'd already instructed his man to find out everything about me. "Oakwood Heights," I said finally, "on Maple Street." Something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe surprise. Oakwood Heights was about as far from Westwood Hills as you could get while still being in the same city. It was the kind of neighborhood where rent was cheap because half the streetlights didn't work and the police response time averaged 40 minutes. "Marco," Salvatore said to the driver, not needing to specify further. The privacy partition slid up silently, leaving the three of us enclosed in a bubble of luxury and awkward silence. I stared out the window, watching raindrops race each other down the tinted glass, acutely aware of Salvatore watching me. "So, Miss Emma," he finally said, his voice softer than before, "what were you doing in Westwood Hills so late at night?" "I work there," I replied, meeting his gaze despite the way it made my pulse quicken. "I clean houses." "You're a maid." It wasn't a question, but there was no judgment in his tone either. Just a statement of fact, as if he were cataloging information. "Yes." I lifted my chin slightly, for several families in the area. "And today?" "The Morrisons. They had a dinner party." His expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Charles Morrison, the district attorney?" I nodded, wondering why that particular detail seemed to displease him. "Do you work for him often?" "Tuesdays and Fridays. I have different houses each day of the week." "And they make you take the bus home at this hour?" There was something dangerous in his voice now, a quiet anger that seemed disproportionate to the situation. I shifted uncomfortably. "That's normal. Most of us do." "Most of us?" He raised an eyebrow. "Housekeepers, service workers." I shrugged, trying to keep the defensiveness out of my tone. "We can't all afford chauffeurs, Mr. Russo." To my surprise, he laughed, a rich, deep sound that transformed his face completely. The severe lines softened, and for a moment, I could see the father in him, rather than whatever else he was. "Touché, Miss Sinclair." His amber eyes gleamed with amusement. "You have spirit. I like that." Before I could respond, Luca piped up from his seat. "Miss Emma, do you clean a lot of big houses?" Grateful for the interruption, I turned my attention to the boy. He had nestled into the corner of the seat, my jacket still wrapped around his shoulders despite the car's comfortable temperature. "I do. Some of them are bigger than my entire apartment building." "Do you ever get to swim in their pools?" he asked, eyes wide with curiosity. I smiled at his innocent question. No, that wouldn't be allowed. I just clean them. That's stupid, Luca declared with the absolute certainty of an 8-year-old. If I had a pool, I'd let everyone swim in it. That's very generous of you, I said, my smile widening. Luca, Salvatore interjected gently. Miss Emma works very hard. It's not a game. The boy's expression turned solemn. I'm sorry, Miss Emma. I didn't mean to be rude. You weren't rude at all, I assured him. It's a nice thought. Luca beamed at me, then yawned widely, the excitement and stress of the evening clearly catching up with him. He curled up on the seat, eyelids drooping. You should get some rest, piccolo mio, Salvatore said, his voice softening to a tender rumble. He reached across to brush Luca's damp hair from his forehead, with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his intimidating presence. We'll be home soon. But I want to talk to Miss Emma, Luca protested, even as his eyes drifted closed. There will be time for that, Salvatore said, his gaze shifting to me with an intensity that made my mouth go dry. I'm sure we'll be seeing more of Miss Emma. The way he said it, not as a question or suggestion, but as a simple statement of fact, sent a chill through me. It sounded like a promise or a threat. Within minutes, Luca was asleep, his soft breath fogging the window beside him. I watched his peaceful face, wondering about his life, about what kind of childhood he had with a father like Salvatore Russo. He likes you, Salvatore said, breaking the silence. He doesn't trust easily, neither do I. Mr. Russo, Salvatore, he corrected. Please. I hesitated, then continued. Salvatore, I appreciate the ride, but once you drop me off, we're even. You don't owe me anything for helping Luca, and I don't want anything from you. He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. And if I told you that's not how this works, that in my world debts must be paid, then I'd say this isn't your world, I replied, surprising myself with my boldness. It's just a car ride. Another smile, this one slower, more deliberate. You really don't know who I am, do you? The question hung in the air between us. Of course I didn't know who he was. We'd just met. But something in his tone suggested I should know, that his name should mean something to me. Should I? I asked. He leaned forward, closing some of the distance between us. I caught a whiff of his cologne, something expensive and subtle, with notes of cedar and amber. Perhaps it's better that you don't, he said finally. At least for now. The car slowed, and I realized with a start that we had reached my neighborhood. The rain had eased to a gentle patter, but the streets were still slick with water, reflecting the few functioning streetlights in wavering pools of yellow. Compared to Westwood Hills, with its manicured perfection, Oakwood Heights looked like a different planet. Number 1457, correct? The driver's voice came through a speaker. I hadn't told him my specific address, only the street. The realization that they had already obtained this information in the short time since leaving the diner sent a fresh wave of unease through me. Salvatore noticed my reaction. Does that surprise you, Emma? That I would want to know where you live? The casual use of my first name, without the miss, felt oddly intimate. It concerns me, I admitted. I'm nobody important, Mr. Russo. Just a housekeeper who happened to help your son. On the contrary, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You became important the moment you touched something that belongs to me. The possessiveness in those words made my skin prickle with goosebumps. The car stopped in front of my apartment building, a shabby 4-story walk-up with peeling paint and security bars on the lower windows. This is where you live? There was no disguising the displeasure in Salvatore's tone. Not all of us can afford penthouses in Westwood Hills, I said, reaching for the door handle. His hand shot out, closing over mine before I could open the door. His touch was warm, his fingers wrapping around mine with casual strength. Allow me, he said, pressing a button on the console beside him. The driver appeared at my door almost instantly, opening it and extending an umbrella. Salvatore slid across the seat, following me out of the car. I glanced nervously at Luca, still sleeping inside. He'll be fine, Salvatore assured me, correctly interpreting my concern. Marco will watch him. I want to see you safely inside. That's really not necessary. I insist. That word again, laden with authority. He placed his hand on my lower back, guiding me toward the building entrance. I was acutely aware of how we must look to my neighbors, me in my worn uniform, him in what was clearly a bespoke suit worth more than I made in months. Both of us sheltered under an umbrella held by a man who looked more bodyguard than chauffeur. We reached the front door, which had a broken lock that the landlord had been promising to fix for months. I fumbled for my keys anyway, more to have something to do with my hands than out of actual need. "Fourth floor, right side," Salvatore said, confirming he knew not just my address, but the